welcome to my channel. My name is Erica, and today's video is another episode of a true crime series I do here on my channel. I do try to bring these videos to you monthly, but sometimes life has other plans for me, so I have skipped a couple of months. And normally this series is titled True Crime in Oregon. I've always been very intrigued by true crime, and I am from the state of Oregon, so of course I thought it might be interesting to combine those two things. But I do really want to kind of broaden my horizons and bring you cases from other areas of the world as well. Now, this is the case of Cary Stayner, and in 1999, he brutally murdered 4 women in or around the Yosemite National Park in California. And I can't really tell Cary's story without also telling his younger brother Steven's story as well. So actually, this video will be bringing you 2 true crime cases. And all the information I'll be giving you in today's video comes from this book right here. This is called Murder at Yosemite by Carlton Smith. Now, I happened to find this book at a local thrift store, but I'm pretty sure this book is also available on Amazon. So if I can find the link to this book on Amazon, I'll go ahead and pop that in my description box. I will be giving you a lot of information, but I can't really give it all to you, or this video would be hours long. So if you are interested in finding out more about this case, I would highly recommend checking out this book. It's very well written and has a ton of detail about Cary and Steven's case. Now, as with all of my other true crime videos, I want to give a huge disclaimer here. Viewer discretion is absolutely advised. I will be detailing some very violent sexual crimes. I would not have young viewers around while you're watching or listening to this video. So without any further ado, let's get into the case of Cary and Steven Stayner. Cary Anthony Stayner was born on August 13th, 1961. He was born the oldest of 5 children to Del and Kay Stayner in Merced, California. He had 3 younger sisters and a younger brother named Steven. At the age of 3, Cary was diagnosed with a condition called trichotillomania, which is frequent, repeated, and uncontrollable urges to pull hair out from your own scalp, eyebrows, and body hair. Now, he was put on medication, but this condition continued to affect him well into his high school years. He was horribly teased and bullied by his classmates all through school because of his obvious bald spots, and he was rarely seen without a baseball cap on. He was also known to frequently expose his genitalia to other girls in his class and also to young female relatives. Now, this was sort of dealt with, but not really. Basically, it was just kind of chalked up to boys will be boys, and they just hoped that eventually he would grow out of that behavior. Despite these issues, though, Cary was a very intelligent kid, and he was often placed in accelerated classes due to his outstanding academic performance. He also contributed some really awesome cartoon artwork to his high school newspaper, and when he graduated, he was named the most creative student by his graduating class at Merced High School. But not much else is really known about Cary from his childhood, because in 1972, a crime happened in their family that was so horrific that it just overshadowed everyone and everything else. On December 4th of 1972, 7-year-old Steven Stayner was walking home from his Merced Elementary School. Now, normally Cary, age 11 at this time, would be walking home with Steven, but on this particular day, Cary was camping at Yosemite National Park with his grandfather, who happened to live there. Now, suddenly, a gray van pulls up right alongside Steven. A small, older gentleman gets out and approaches him, telling Steven that he belongs to a well-known church in the area and that he has a bunch of religious pamphlets that he would like to give to Steven's mother. And does Steven think that he could come home with him and sit down and talk with his mom about these religious pamphlets? And Steven felt very safe with this guy. You know, he seemed very nice. He was so small that he was close to Steven's own height, so he wasn't like intimidated by him at all. So he agrees to let this man come to his house so that he can chat with his mom. So the man says, well, why don't you just hop in my van here and I'll just give you a ride home? And Steven agrees. And as soon as he gets into the van, he sees another man sitting in the driver's seat. Now, this is Ken Parcell, who is a pedophile and has a predilection for sexually abusing young boys. Now, Ken had been watching Steven for quite some time and was just waiting for the right moment to abduct him. And because Cary or none of the other kids were with him, he finally had his chance to abduct 7-year-old Steven Stayner. Initially, Ken took Steven to a very small trailer home just kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And he sits Steven down and he tells him that actually Steven's parents have arranged all this, that they are no longer able to afford to take care of Steven, that they've actually gone to court and signed over custody of Steven to Ken. So now Ken will be raising Steven for the rest of his life. Another way that he takes complete control over Steven is he starts drugging him with sleeping pills. For the first several days into weeks, a lot of what Ken would do to really disorient Steven would be to drug him with these sleeping pills and then take him to various locations, like out in the middle of nowhere, just off the grid. And of course, he would keep him inside these places that they were staying. So he really had no idea where he was. He had no idea of the landscape. And he was so drugged and so drowsy and so disoriented that even if he tried to escape, he just really wasn't able to. He wasn't physically able to, and he had absolutely no idea where he was. Now, back in Steven's hometown of Merced, as soon as he doesn't come home from school, Kay knows that there's something very wrong, and she immediately calls the police and reports him missing. Now, of course, the police come to the house and they start investigating, but the problem is nobody saw him be abducted. He was completely by himself. I mean, Ken knew what he was doing. I don't think this was the first time Ken Parcell had ever done this. I didn't read anything about him abducting any boys at this point, but he had sexually abused many boys by this point in his life. So they just didn't really have any clues to go off of. You know, they kind of retraced the steps that they felt Steven would take, but there were no clues, nothing to really start investigating other than just we have a missing 7-year-old boy here. And of course, the Stayner family is absolutely devastated. And as time goes on, of course, it just gets worse and worse. And Steven's abduction and him being missing in the family absolutely consumes the Stayner family. I mean, the parents, Del and Kay, are just barely able to function. I mean, they don't even know what to do. How are they going to continue to raise their other 4 children when their 7-year-old son has been abducted? So that really became this like black hole center of their family, was the kidnapping of Steven. On Christmas of 1972 was when Ken and this small man moved into a very rundown cabin with no electricity, no running water in Yosemite Valley. Now, Steven was able to kind of surmise, just based on what he was hearing Ken and this man talk about, that both of these men actually worked at the main lodge in Yosemite National Park. And because Steven's grandfather lived in Yosemite National Park, he sort of knew the layout. So he kind of felt maybe a little encouraged that he could possibly escape and find his way home. But it was almost like Ken knew that Steven might be getting brave and attempting to escape. And that's when he started horribly sexually abusing Steven. And this went on for the entire time that he was held captive. He would also continually brainwash him with these just horrible lies about his own family, saying that he was never wanted, he was never loved, and that Ken was now his father. As the weeks turned to months, turned to years, Ken was very manipulative of Steven and really played on his emotions. At one point, within I think the first year or 2 of him being in captivity, he bought Steven a dog. He would take him to the mall and buy him things. He would even have him be around other people. Ken actually went so far as to change Steven's name to Dennis. He convinced Steven that his new name was Dennis Parcell, and that whenever they were out in public, he was always to refer to Ken as Dad. So the people that they were around really believed that Ken was Dennis's father. Now, Steven hated the way that he was living. He hated the way that he was being treated. But this was all he knew. You have to remember, he was 7 years old when he was taken. And so at such a young age, to be thrust into this horribly awful, abusive situation, and to have Ken being really his only lifeline, the only person that he could turn to, the only adult in his life that was really, quote unquote, there for him, he just had really no other choice but to just kind of go along with what was happening to him. When Steven turned 12 years old, Ken started to give him some kind of bizarre freedoms. He was allowing him to smoke, drink alcohol, stay out late at night. And, you know, that I think that made it even more confusing for Steven, because here he is being abducted by this man, being horribly abused, but then he was also being showered with affection at times, being given a dog, and now he's able to smoke and drink and just kind of do whatever he wants. And at age 14, Steven was actually enrolled into Point Arena High School, And at this time, Ken was actually working as a night manager at a local hotel in Ukiah, California. And Steven was able to make friends and hang out and kind of do whatever he wanted to. So it was just this very strange, confusing situation that Steven was in. He just felt like this was just going to be his life from now on. Now, of course, back in Merced, they're still continuing to search for Steven, but the case goes cold pretty quickly. Also remember, it's 1972, so the investigative techniques really are not that advanced or that sophisticated. And so they just kind of determined that Steven is probably dead. Now, their biggest fear, of course, was that he was kidnapped by a pedophile. And they're just thinking that, as the years continue to go on, that they're probably never going to find Steven alive. And the Stayner family really does try to do their best to move on with their lives, just not knowing what happened to Steven. But can you imagine what that would be like, not knowing what happened to your 7-year-old son? Meanwhile, years are going by. He's not been found. Nobody has seen him, nothing. So this was just this sick pit of despair and fear and worry that plagued the Stayner family the entire time that Steven was in captivity. So at this time, like I said, Steven is 14 and he's going to Point Arena High School. Ken is starting to see that Steven is getting a little too old for his tastes. He wants to have a new, younger son to sexually abuse. So he goes to the Ukiah High School, not the high school that Steven was going to, and meets this 17-year-old boy who he starts to groom, who he starts to ply with cigarettes and alcohol, and convinces this boy to help him kidnap another child. So unbeknownst to Steven, on February 14th, 1980, Ken convinces the 17-year-old boy to help him kidnap 5-year-old Timmy White as he's walking home from the Ukiah Elementary School, about 3 short blocks to his babysitter's house, as he would normally do. And they are successful at kidnapping Timmy White. And of course, they take him back to this cabin that they're staying in. And when Steven gets home from school that day, and he sees this frightened, wide-eyed, terrified 5-year-old boy, something in him finally just snaps. And he's like, I am not going to allow another child to go through what I've been through. So he really does his best to protect Timmy from Ken. As far as I could tell from the book that I read, he never did sexually abuse Timmy because Steven was like on red alert constantly, just keeping himself between Ken and Timmy as often as he could. And on March 19th of 1980, in the middle of the night, Steven was able to whisk Timmy away from the cabin, and they're out in the middle of nowhere, but they eventually walk to a road where they hitchhike to the Ukiah police station. Now, like I said, it's the middle of the night and there's not a lot of police officers present, but when these 2 young boys come to the door knocking on the window, they're like, what the heck's going on? Now, Timmy has had his hair dyed a completely different color, and he's lost quite a bit of weight. So initially, when Timmy and Steven start to tell the police officers who Timmy is, they don't believe him because he looks nothing like the pictures that they have. They of course are searching for him as well, and a little over a month has gone by since Timmy's been kidnapped. But the more they talk to him and ask him questions, they do determine that yes, this is 5-year-old kidnapped Timmy White. They call Timmy's family. Of course, they race to the Ukiah police station, and they have this very emotional, wonderful family reunion. But then the police officers start to look at 14-year-old Steven Stayner, and they're like, who is this kid? Did he have anything to do with the kidnapping? And of course, Steven and Timmy say, no, he had nothing to do with the kidnapping. But they have no idea who this kid is, and he's not really providing them with any information until suddenly he finally says, I know my real name is Steven. And there are a couple of police officers at the Ukiah police station that are very familiar with the Steven Stayner case, and their blood just runs cold. They are like, this is Steven Stayner? Can this possibly be Steven Stayner? So in a frantic, panic, they start searching through information about Steven Stayner and come across a flyer with Steven's 7-year-old picture on it. And they compare it to the 14-year-old Steven Stayner's face. And there's just enough resemblance that they're like, yes, this is Steven Stayner. He'd been missing for almost 8 years by this point. So they immediately call Del and Kay Stayner, who come racing to the Ukiah police station, and they are just absolutely out of their minds with joy and happiness and relief that here is their precious baby that had been kidnapped almost 8 years prior. And they had a very intense, very emotional family reunion. But this didn't have the fairy tale story that I think most of us would wish that it would have, because Steven had been in this captive state for almost 8 years, at a very early age, very formative age of his life, 7 years old. Now he's 14. And he had been horribly abused. He had been horribly manipulated, horribly brainwashed and lied to, and had been allowed to just kind of do whatever he wanted to do for the last couple of years of his captivity. Now, Del and Kay Stayner did not raise their children in that way. So for Steven to come back into their home after being gone for almost 8 years, it was pretty difficult, pretty hard for everyone to kind of coexist with each other. And of course, Ken Parcell and his partner in crime for these kidnappings were arrested and put in jail, of course, waiting for court proceedings to begin. And the news media, of course, just leapt on this whole case. And it didn't take long for the media to determine that Ken Parcell was a known pedophile. And when that information got out, Steven is now attending Merced High School as a freshman. Rather than the kids being understanding or loving or caring or compassionate, no, they start bullying him and making fun of him that he lived with a pedophile for 8 years. And so Steven was dealing with a lot of anger and sadness about how he was being treated by his peers coming back to his hometown. That must have been absolutely devastating for him. And of course, we have the other siblings, Cary and his 3 sisters, that are now having to reassimilate to Steven being back in the household. And once again, Steven returning to the household is just the absolute focus of the entire family. So Cary and his sisters felt very neglected and very not cared about or not important, because Steven was always at the center of the family. Now, as the court case against Ken Parcell was being put together by Merced prosecutors, it was found out that Ken Parcell himself had been a victim of violent sexual abuse when he was a child. So, of course, his defense attorneys really leapt on that and were trying to make that his excuse as to why he kidnapped both Steven and Timmy and had horribly abused Steven. And they were also focusing on the fact that Ken kept telling the story of being this very lonely man, and he just wanted a family. And so that's why he took Steven and Timmy, because he just really wanted to have children of his own, and he just wasn't able to do that. So that was the defense. That was Ken's defense when the trial finally started. And even though there was clear evidence in Ken Parcell's trial that he had sexually abused several minor boys, he didn't really get that heavy of a sentence. Now, he was sentenced to 7 years in prison for the kidnapping of Timmy White, but he was only given an additional 20 months in prison for kidnapping Steven Stayner and holding him captive and abusing him for almost 8 years. There was some weird quirk in the law, and that was the maximum amount of time they could add to the sentence that he was given for the kidnapping of Timmy White. And ultimately, he served 5 years in prison and was let out. Now, let me give you a little bit more information about Ken Parcell here. In 2004, he was rearrested for attempting to coerce his caregiver to go out and kidnap another young boy for him for his own sexual gratification. Now, this freaked this woman out so much that she fortunately immediately went to the police, and she actually worked with the police to set up a sting operation, and they were able to arrest Ken. And he was incarcerated up until 2008, when he passed away at the California Medical Center in Vacaville, California at age 76 due to natural causes. Now, Steven Stayner did graduate from high school. He married his high school sweetheart and had 2 beautiful children, a son and a daughter. But sadly, in 1989, at the age of 23, he was killed in a motorcycle accident. So, of course, Cary was raised in this shadow of his brother being kidnapped, his brother being returned, that being kind of a difficult situation to get through. And now at age 23, his brother has been killed, which absolutely devastated his entire family. Now, shortly after Cary graduated from high school, he did go to work at a local glass company as a window installer. And he started to threaten his fellow coworkers, telling them that he fantasized about driving his truck through the building or lighting the building on fire and killing everyone inside. In 1991, at age 30, Cary did try to end his own life by gassing himself to death with carbon monoxide, but was unsuccessful. In 1997, he was arrested for possession of marijuana and methamphetamine, but those charges ended up being dropped. And also in that same year, 1997, Cary was hired as a handyman at the Cedar Lodge Motel in El Portal, California, which is like the entrance town into the Yosemite National Park. And of course, the management at the Cedar Lodge Motel felt that Cary was the perfect fit as their handyman because he had really grown up in the Yosemite National Park. Like I mentioned, his grandfather lived there. So Cary knew this park like the back of his hand. And because he was so reliable and always so quick to help and do things, they allowed him to live at the Cedar Lodge Motel all year round, not just during the on-season or the tourist season, but also during the off-season as well. Now, things seemed very quiet in Cary's life. He's kind of off the radar. He wasn't really triggering any red flags in anyone. I mean, everyone that knew him that worked at the Cedar Lodge Motel and the tourists that would stay there all just felt that he was a really nice, normal, average, quiet guy. Until on February 15th of 1999, 3 women went missing off the face of the earth that had just stayed at the Cedar Lodge Motel. Now, on the evening of February 15th of 1999, 42-year-old Carol Sund, her 15-year-old daughter, Juliana or Julie Sund, and their 16-year-old family friend, Silvina Peloso, were last seen leaving the dining area at the Cedar Lodge Motel and literally just vanished into thin air. Now, these 3 women had actually left Eureka, California on February 12th of 1999, and the whole goal was for them just to drive to Yosemite National Park, spend a few days sightseeing, and then drive on to San Francisco, California, where they were going to meet Carol's husband, Jens, and their 3 other children. They were all going to board a plane together and fly to see Jens' sister, who was living in Arizona. And Silvina had actually been staying with the Sund family in Eureka since November of 1998. She was the daughter of Carol's best friend from college, who was actually from Argentina. Carol had gone to Argentina to do some studies there and met Silvina's mother, and they just became lifelong soul sisters. And this was Silvina's first trip to the United States, and Carol was just thrilled to have her there with her daughter. They had become very close friends as well, and just to show her some of the sights around California while she was visiting. Now, on February 16th, when Jens and the 3 other Sund children arrive at the San Francisco airport, Carol, Julie, and Silvina are nowhere to be found. So initially, he just kind of thinks, well, maybe something happened. Maybe there was a change of plans, and Carol just went on to Arizona without me. Carol was a very organized, very dependable, very reliable woman. So initially, Jens was not concerned. He just thought, well, that the rental car isn't here. They had rented a car, obviously, to tour around Yosemite National Park, and they were going to drop it off at the San Francisco airport. And, when the car wasn't returned and, Carol and the girls aren't there, he's just thinking, well, they've just taken the car and gone to Arizona. So he and the 3 kids board the flight to Arizona. And when it lands and they get out and greet Jens' sister, of course, Carol and Julie and Silvina are not there. And Jens panics because this is totally unlike Carol. So he immediately calls the police. So of course, Jens and the other children fly back to California, and the investigation is in full swing immediately. Now, because the Cedar Lodge Motel, where they were last sighted in El Portal, California, is so close to Yosemite National Park, that is considered federal land. So the FBI is called in to help investigate immediately as well. Now, where they start is at the Cedar Lodge Motel, of course, where they were last seen. They notice immediately that the rental car is not in the parking lot. They start interviewing all the guests at the motel, and they interview all the staff at the Cedar Lodge Motel, Cary Stayner being one of those people that gets interviewed. And they're just not able to find anything other than people saw them eating dinner in the dining room on the night of February 15th. And then when they left, everyone just assumed they'd gone back to their room. They do go to the motel room. The beds are made. There is a damp towel in the bathroom. So obviously somebody had taken a shower the evening before on the 15th. The key to the room is in plain view, but there's no luggage. Carol's purse is missing. And of course the car's missing. So they're thinking, what in the world, did they just get in the car and take off? And if they did, where would they be? And Jens is telling the investigators, I'm telling you, my wife would never do that. She would not take these girls and just take off to some unknown destination. She's very regimented. She's very detail oriented. She's very dependable, very reliable. I'm telling you, something is wrong here. And the next day, on February 17th, a break comes in the case. Carol's son's wallet is found in the middle of the street in Modesto, California, over 100 miles away from El Portal. And a teenage girl happens to find it. And of course, she turns it into the police. So basically, they're thinking that Carol and Julie and Silvina are somewhere in Modesto, California. So now, of course, at this point, Jens has contacted his own parents. He's contacted Carol's parents. He's also contacted Silvina's parents in Argentina and let everybody know that they're missing. And, you know, we need your help. We need to set up some kind of like investigative headquarters. So everyone rallies and comes to the Holiday Inn in Modesto, California, where they do set up this investigative headquarters with phones and a tip line. They start making flyers, getting those out everywhere to just try to find out if anyone has seen Carol, Julie, or Silvina. And if not, have they seen the car? I mean, they have nothing, no clues to go on at this point at all. They also started looking into Carol's bank accounts, and there was absolutely no activity going on in her bank accounts at all. And so that was kind of worrisome too. Like if she'd taken off and she was still alive, you would think that she would be, you know, withdrawing money out of her accounts or something. Well, that wasn't happening. So the fear is that, of course, they've been kidnapped and hopefully they're still alive. I mean, that's what they're all hoping for. And there are dozens of tips that are coming through on the tip line at the Holiday Inn in Modesto, California. And they are following up on lots of these tips, but they're just leading absolutely nowhere. You know, people are seeing them in different places. They'll go to investigate and it's not Carol or Julie or Silvina that were seen. And I believe it was either the 17th or the 18th of February, Jens and the family hold a press conference in Modesto, California. And this gets national attention. So across the entire United States, people are aware that Carol's son, her daughter, and their family friend have gone missing. And also, as time goes on, the families decide to issue a reward. They say, if you can give us any credible information, we'll give this person $250,000. And of course, these families are absolutely devastated. The Pelosos come from Argentina. Like I mentioned, Carol's family is there, Jens's family is there, and they are just, you know, losing their mind with worry and grief. Where are these women? Now, as February turns into March, there still are really no credible leads, credible evidence, nothing. The families are desperately holding on to some sort of hope that somewhere these women are alive. But on March 19th, the burnt out husk of the rental car is found in Long Barn, California. On March 19th, this man just happened to be driving through these like back deserted roads in Long Barn looking for firewood to cut up and happens to come upon the 1999 Pontiac Grand Prix that is just burnt to a crisp, just sitting there in this on this deserted logging road. So of course he goes and calls the police, and the FBI and the police investigators immediately race to where the car is. And of course they set up a crime scene and start investigating the car and the area surrounding the car as well. And what they notice right away is that there is a roll of exposed film laying not far away from the burnt out car. And, you know, it takes a couple days, but they do go and have the film developed. And they can see the last couple of days of their lives, like the February 12th to the 15th, from the time they left Eureka until they got to the Cedar Lodge Motel, until they were no longer seen anymore. And so they can kind of track their activities, and they were just sightseeing in Yosemite and having a good time hanging out in their hotel room. So all these sightings that people were reporting were totally false. And I guess that kind of gave them a little bit of peace of mind to know that the sightings weren't credible, because there was some controversy about those sightings and some criticism of the police force for not really investigating the sightings as well as people thought they should. But also they were devastated that there's no more pictures after February 15th on this roll of film. And here is, of course, is this burnout car. So eventually they do take the car down to I think it was the Modesto crime lab, and start investigating. And it takes like, I think almost 48 hours before they finally open the trunk. And inside the vehicle, they find 42-year-old Carol Sund and 16-year-old Silvina Peloso. Now they determined, even though they were burnt beyond recognition and had to be identified through their dental records, Carol had been strangled to death and also shot, and that Silvina had been sexually assaulted and also shot. But Julie was not in the car. So they're hoping that maybe Julie is still alive somewhere. So of course the investigation continues, and about a week after the car was found, I believe it was on March 25th of 1999, the Modesto police station receives this letter. Now the letter should have gotten to them a few days beforehand, but I guess it was like mishandled. So when they finally open up this letter, there's this crude map drawn of Yosemite National Park showing where Julie's remains can be found. And there is a handwritten sentence at the bottom of this map that says, "We had fun with this one." So of course the police take this crudely drawn map and they head into Yosemite National Park, and they end up finding this location. And of course they come upon the remains of 15-year-old Julie Sund. Now, when they found her, her arms were crossed over her chest and her ankles were taped together with duct tape. And she had her neck sliced to the point where her head was almost removed, like she was almost decapitated. And even though she was in a state of decomposition, they could tell, just by looking at her, that it was 15-year-old Julie Sund. So now we have the Sund family and also the Peloso family that know now without a shadow of a doubt that these three wonderful, beautiful, incredible women are no longer living. And they have to deal with the grief and the tragedy and the horrendousness of these horrible crimes. But they still have absolutely no idea who to go after for these crimes. Now, they did arrest two men who fit the mold for who they thought could possibly have been responsible for kidnapping and murdering these women. And they held them in jail for quite some time. And eventually they did what was called a parolee sweep, where they went around the El Portal area, the Modesto area, and they rounded up all these parolees who had, violent sexual crimes in their history, and, brought them down to the police station and thoroughly interviewed all of them. But these two gentlemen that they really felt strongly could have been the perpetrators of these crimes, they just didn't have any physical evidence to really tie them to these crimes. It was all kind of like circumstantial, kind of wishy-washy details. So, they had to let them go because they just didn't have anything to really hold them there with. So the police and the FBI agents decide to kind of just start the investigation over completely, start from scratch. So they go back to the Cedar Lodge Motel and start really interviewing all of the staff members there. And of course, they sit down again with Cary Stayner. Now, the first time they interviewed him, he was very calm, he was very polite, very, open, and just chatting with them and talking to them like, didn't seem upset or nervous at all. And the same way with the second interrogation, he just was very calm and easygoing and seemed kind of quiet, kind of reserved. But as they started to look more into Cary Stayner, into all the employees at the Cedar Lodge Motel, they realized that Cary was the only person that had full year-round privileges to live at the Cedar Lodge Motel, not just during the on-season, but all year round. And they thought that was a little strange. But again, they had no evidence, nothing to tie him to any of these crimes. Until on July 22nd of 1999, the decapitated corpse of 26-year-old naturalist Joey Armstrong was found near her cabin in the Yosemite National Park. Now, she had been employed by the Yosemite Institute to do some research in the park, but she'd been doing this for years. And on the day before, July 21st, she was just packing up her vehicle to take off to her next trip to a different park. Now, the person who discovered her corpse, of course, reports this to the police, and they come out to investigate and start interviewing some people that live nearby her cabin, and very quickly determine that Cary Stayner was seen in the driveway of her cabin on the 21st of July. Not only that, but people reported seeing his blue International Scout vehicle in the driveway. And not far away from her corpse, they found a red mechanic's cap that also belonged to Cary Stayner. So the investigators go immediately to the Cedar Lodge Motel and arrest Cary Stayner and take him down to the local police station. And it didn't take long for Cary to just simply confess to murdering Joey, Carol, Julie, and Sylvina. But as they were interrogating him, he stopped giving details and came back with a proposition for the police. He said, "I'll continue to give you details about these murders, but I want to be provided with child pornography." And of course, the investigators were like, "No, we're not giving you that. You're going to give us all of the details behind these murders or else." And he just told them that on the night of February 15th of 1999, he witnessed Carol, Julie, and Sylvina leave the dining hall, heading back to their room, and just had this overwhelming urge to murder them. So he goes to their motel room door, knocks, they let him in, and he says he's a handyman and that there's a water leak in the room above them, and he's worried that it's going to cause damage and flood their room. So he asks all three of them to come out, has them grab all their luggage and whatnot. And as soon as they get outside of the hotel room, he holds them at gunpoint and directs them down to the rental car, forces them to drive out to Long Barn, California, along this deserted logging road. He murders both Julie and Sylvina, puts them in the trunk, lights the car on fire, then proceeds to put Julie into his vehicle and drives her out to the spot where she was found in Yosemite National Park, where he, obviously murders her. And then he tells them that on July 21st, he happened to be driving through Yosemite National Park, where he came upon Joey Armstrong packing up her car for her trip, and again was possessed by this overwhelming urge to murder her. So he did. And the police and the FBI agents that are questioning him cannot believe that they had him in their sights, basically within their grasp, the entire time of this investigation for 5 months now. And they just didn't have any clue that he was capable of doing this. He didn't have much of a criminal background, at least not a criminal background that would dictate to them that he might be capable of doing something like this. I mean, they were just flabbergasted that he'd gotten away with these 3 murders for so long and then also committed another one during this entire investigation. They just couldn't believe it. So he was arrested and charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. At Cary Stayner's trial, initially he pled not guilty, and his attorneys really tried to push that Cary was mentally ill and that this mental illness started in 1972 when his 7-year-old brother Steven had been kidnapped, that it just totally altered and overshadowed his entire life and kind of put him on this violent trajectory from that point onward. And Cary also said that he had been sexually abused by his uncle when he was a child. So of course they used that as part of his defense too. But the judge showed absolutely no leniency towards Cary Stayner at all. And in August of 2002, he was sentenced to death. But due to a ruling on capital punishment in California, there has been no executions since 2006. So he is currently living on death row at the San Quentin prison in California. And after some further investigation into Cary Stayner's life, he is also the suspect in 3 other murders, including his uncle that he claims sexually molested him when he was a child. Now, of course, I'm going to give you my 2 cents about this case because I do that in all of these videos. This was obviously an extremely tough book to read. I mean, all the books I read are really difficult to get through. And I can understand that at age 11, when your 7-year-old brother has been kidnapped and your family just completely falls apart, I can imagine that that would definitely cause some deep emotional scarring in your life. Of course, I can understand that. And I don't think that the Stayner family, even though they did have some counseling and some therapy, I don't know that it was really maybe as much as it should have been or could have been. Should is not my favorite word. I think a lot of it was just the time that this happened in the 70s into the 80s. I think there wasn't a lot of push for people to seek therapy at that point in time. I think they just didn't have like the skills or maybe the coping skills I mean, I don't know how you have coping skills to get through your child being kidnapped and then trying to raise your other children and live your life. I don't know how you do that. And then this child comes back and it's this wonderful experience, but also extremely disruptive and very confusing and very difficult. So yeah, I mean, I can understand how that would be just so horrible for every single member of the Stayner family to go through. But the thing is that Cary was showing some signs that things were off with him before Steven was even kidnapped. You know, I don't think that they dealt with the teasing and the bullying that he experienced from having his trichotillomania condition very well. And so it was like they just kind of left Cary to his own devices. Now, I'm not blaming his parents at all. Okay, I'm not, because I don't know how you get through that. I have no clue how that would ever, how you would ever get through it. But I do feel like as Cary grew into an adult, I just wish that he had gotten himself some help. I think if he had done that, maybe he would not have murdered these 4 women. And I do believe that he murdered 3 other people as well. After reading the book and some other articles on Google that I read, I do believe that he's guilty of those murders as well. They just were never able to conclusively tie him to those. But at the same time, and I say this every time I do these videos, there's just no excuse for taking human life in that way, or in any way, unless it's self-defense. There's just no excuse for that kind of behavior. Carol and Julie and Sylvina and Joey were doing nothing wrong. They were just living their lives. They just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. And Cary took full advantage of their vulnerability, basically. Totally manipulated Carol, Julie, and Sylvina. And I have no idea what he said to Joey. But, you know, he came across as such a normal, average, quiet, nice, kind, just everyday looking type of guy that he really used his looks, I think, as a way to manipulate his victims. And it's just so devastating that these 4 incredible, beautiful lives were lost. And actually this morning, I read a very touching article about Yen Sund. You know, he continued to raise his 3 other children without his wife and his daughter. And also they interviewed Sylvina Peloso's mother, who was Carol Sund's like soul sister best friend. And just how devastating their lives have continued to be since the loss of these women. You know, they've all tried really hard to get on with their lives and to live their lives as best as they can, but it's just been grueling for them. And for Sylvina to come to America for the first time, so excited to have this wonderful experience with basically her aunt and her cousin, you know, they were so close, that's what they considered each other, and her life was taken away. And there is absolutely no chance that Cary Stayner will ever get out of prison. I mean, he will be on death row, whether they execute him or not. He will be on death row in San Quentin prison for the rest of his life. And thank goodness for that. I don't know. This was a tough one. And I also have this huge aching spot in my heart for Steven Stayner. I mean, what a horrible experience that he endured from age 7 until 14, and then to come back to his hometown and be treated so horribly by his peers, and then to pass away at age 23 when he was just starting his adult life with his wife and his children. I mean, this is just tragic all the way around. It really is. But Cary Stayner deserves to be in prison, without a doubt, for the rest of his life. So let me know in the comments section if you are familiar with this case, if you'd ever heard of this case before. We can chat about that in the comments section. My next episode will be coming hopefully next month. I do have a case that Andy from Andy Does Stuff recommended that I cover in my next video, so I will be covering that case. And as always, I want to thank you very much for taking time out of your day or night to sit down and watch this very difficult, very emotionally charged video. It really does mean a lot to me. I hope you guys take such good care of yourselves, stay safe, and I will see you soon.